Did we all watch the same game? Arch Manning made his long-awaited debut in the biggest spotlight of the weekend. 17 completions on 30 attempts, around 170 yards, 0 touchdowns, a QBR hovering near 58. Early dirt balls, missed reads, a late flurry, sure, but mostly a night that looked ordinary. And yet the reaction? Training wheels. Let him cook. First start jitters. Analysts and fan pages rushed to wrap the moment in bubble wrap. The message? Given time. Now look across the field of discourse. Shedeur Sanders, 2 4,000-yard seasons on his resume. Leadership, awards, clutch tape, gets dissected for a handful of pressured preseason snaps like he committed a football crime. One quiet outing and the labels arrive. Not ready, overhyped, 5th round ceiling. Same position, different standards. So ask yourself, are we grading tape or protecting a last name? Before Arch ever faced real adversity, the Coronation was underway. Top-rank recruit, most polished, generational potential. Headlines built a runway long before the film could. Then the lights hit, the numbers underwhelmed, and somehow the narrative bent not to what happened, but to what was promised. Meanwhile, Shedeur's threshold for grace seems microscopic. Limited reps? Doesn't matter. New system? No excuses. Pressure in his face? Should rise above it. The same patience granted elsewhere gets withheld when the player already has his own platform and a last name that makes gatekeepers uneasy. Some viewers say that's bias. Others call it branding. Either way, the pattern's hard to miss. When one QB struggles, we blame the scheme. When another does, we blame the player. We're going to lay it out, clean, fast, and with receipts. The pre-snap coronation versus the post-game protection, the stat gaps and the goalposts that move to cover them, the analyst takes that contradict themselves in real time, and the deeper engine behind it all, incentives, legacy, and narrative control. Because if this is really about performance, then the standard should be simple: same tape, same rules. Long before Arch Manning threw a real college pass, the story was already written. Recruiting services stamped him #1. Segments called him the most polished high school QB in a generation. Some outlets floated, best since Tebow. Highlight edits, legacy packages, and glossy profiles turned a freshman into a forecast. That wasn't analysis. That was a rollout. ESPN cut-ins for a commitment. Podcasts projecting him as a future #1 overall pick. Features praising footwork, pocket presence, bloodline intelligence. Even his demeanor got brand treatment. Calm, composed, built for the moment. All of this arrived before the adversity did. Meanwhile, context got blurry. While Texas prepped for playoff runs behind Quinn Ewers, coverage often orbited Arch. Practice clips, interview bites, when will we see him updates? Fans noticed. The machine wasn't waiting on tape. It was building anticipation into inevitability. None of this is Arch's fault. He didn't script the headlines, but the saturation matters. When a narrative crowns you early, reactions bend to match the promise. Missed throws become first start nerves. Conservative game plans become training wheels. The presumption of greatness softens every landing. Contrast that with how grace is usually earned. Most young quarterbacks get 2 currencies: reps and patience. They struggle, learn, stack snaps, then grow. Arch's path flipped it. Patience up front, proof later. That's what rankles viewers. Not that he can't become elite, but that the grading scale looked curved before the exam. This is how legacy works in modern football. Attention compounds, expectations inflate, and critique gets framed around potential, not performance. When you inherit a brand, the benefit of the doubt arrives pre-installed. All of that context is the stage. Then the lights came on. Now to the game that was supposed to justify the coronation. Arch Manning's debut ended 17 of 30 for roughly 170 yards, 0 touchdowns, and a QBR around 58. The opening throw skipped. Several clean windows were missed. Rhythm came and went, until a brief late surge produced a few chunk gains. It wasn't a disaster, but it wasn't the generational unveiling the build-up promised. It looked like a first start against a great defense. Uneven, jittery, flashes late. And yet the reaction swerved. Training wheels, conservative plan, let him cook. Some analysts framed it as the staff limiting him. Others pointed to the venue, the moment, the magnitude. Valid context. But notice how quickly the conversation moved away from what happened on the field to what could have happened if the call sheet were different. Reports claimed he wasn't allowed to show the full arsenal. The narrative softened the throws, then spotlighted the potential. Grace isn't the problem, selective grace is. It's fair to acknowledge stakes, nerves, and scheme. It's also fair to say a QB missed throws he must hit, regardless of script. Both can be true, but the tone suggested the box score was more a coaching artifact than a quarterback performance, as if the film needed a disclaimer before we could discuss it honestly. This matters because first impressions set standards. If the first instinct is to shield the tape with hypotheticals, you set a precedent. Some players get patience extended in advance. Others are asked to prove it first, then maybe earn a softer landing later. That's not about talent. That's about narrative momentum. To be clear, none of this precludes growth. Arch can improve and likely will. The question isn't whether he'll develop, it's why the conversation bent away from the film the second it hit the screen. Same weekend, 2 timelines. Arch Manning posts a modest debut, around 170 yards, no touchdowns, a QBR in the high 50s. The reaction leans toward comfort. First start nerves, tough venue, play calling kept him boxed in. Be patient. Shedeur Sanders arrives with something most young QBs don't: production. 2 4K yard seasons, records, leadership in chaos, real late-game poise. His first NFL action? Limited snaps behind a mixed unit. Heat in his face, no turnovers. The reaction leans the other way. Not ready, overhyped. 5th round ceiling. Be skeptical. See the split? For Arch, context cushions the numbers. For Shedeur, context disappears. New system? Doesn't matter. Rotating personnel? Doesn't matter. Short runway? Doesn't matter. The scrutiny tightens not because of what's on the film that night, but because of what some decided beforehand. This is how goalposts move. When a favored prospect struggles, we talk about ceiling, scheme, and patience. When a non-favored prospect steadies himself under pressure, we talk about floor, limitations, and draft slot. One is graded on potential, the other on perfection. To be clear, it's fine to give grace to a young quarterback. It's smart, but grace should travel. If we can accept jitters, timing, and play sheet training wheels for one, we should acknowledge protection issues, split reps, and small sample size for the other. Same sport, same position, same rules. Fans noticed. Clips, timelines, and quotes started stacking. The message they heard wasn't evaluate fairly. It was some stories get cushions, others get cliffs. None of this locks anyone's future. Arch can grow. Shedeur can rise. The issue isn't development, it's the frame wrapped around it. If performance really leads, the conversation should start with the tape and stay there. So how did the frame shift so fast? Here's where the split shows up in plain language. After Arch's rocky debut, a wave of analysis leaned toward protection. Phrases like training wheels, let him cook, and first start jitters framed the night as a coaching choice more than a quarterback performance. The takeaway: patience. Now compare that to how Shedeur Sanders has been discussed. According to widely shared clips, one prominent analyst suggested Shedeur might not see the field this season unless 3 guys go down, based on limited preseason snaps. When called out, the justification shifted to coaches see practice and trust the daily reps. So which is it? Do we trust the film we just watched or the unseen practices? Do we grade the scheme or the player? Because when it's Arch, reps are too scripted to judge. When it's Shedeur, a handful of pressured dropbacks become a referendum on his ceiling. That's the goalpost shuffle. Tape matters until it doesn't. Context matters for some. Potential buys time, depending on the name. To be clear, patience is smart for any young QB, but patience shouldn't be a private membership. If you can explain away missed throws with environment and play calling, you can also acknowledge protection breakdowns, rotating personnel, and tiny sample sizes. Fans notice the contradiction in real time. The same voices who floated top 5 pick next year for Shedeur months ago cooled the moment his draft slot fell, while doubling down on optimism for Arch after a middling box score. Nothing about the players changed overnight. Only the framing did. And framing isn't random. It follows incentives. Protect the familiar, question the disruptor. That's not football logic. That's brand logic dressed as analysis. If we're going to be honest about development, the yardstick can't switch hands mid-drive. Keep it steady, or call it what it is, a story we're bending to fit comfort. There's a reason some quarterbacks land on soft cushions while others hit concrete. Legacy sells. Familiar faces feel safe. And in a media ecosystem where attention equals revenue, the safest bet often gets the warmest edit. Arch Manning arrives pre-packaged, iconic surname, clean image, sponsor-friendly demeanor. He fits the template brands and networks know how to market. That doesn't make him a villain. It makes him the default. Shedeur Sanders walks in with something different. His own platform, his own audience, and a last name tied to a figure who built a career defying templates. To some front offices and commentators, that reads as unpredictable. Some observers argue that's where the grading scale tilts, toward what's easy to manage, away from what forces the machine to adjust. You can hear it in the vocabulary. For one player, the buzzwords are poise, pedigree, patience. For the other, the words skew toward brand, distraction, prove it. Same confidence, different labels. Same visibility, different interpretation. Critics say it's not just football commentary, it's risk management. There's also the incentive layer. A polished legacy prospect aligns with sponsors, ratings hits, and storyline stability. A quarterback who already controls his message, who can set narratives without the usual gatekeepers, threatens that stability. Reports and fan threads suggest that's when protect the locker room becomes a catch-all for protect the narrative. None of this means Arch didn't earn his shot, or that Shedeur's path should be free of critique. It means the frame matters. If one player's misfires get wrapped in system explanations while another's steadiness under pressure turns into a referendum on attitude, we're not just watching tape, we're watching public relations. And that's the point. The shield isn't only on the helmet, it's around the story. If the measure is truly football, the yardstick should be the same regardless of the name on the back. Not every bias shows up as a headline. Sometimes it hides in the adjectives. Some viewers argue the coverage uses different words for the same behaviors. Threads circulating after week 1 point to a pattern. When Arch shows confidence, it's poise. When Shedeur shows confidence, it's cocky. When Arch resets after a miss, it's calm under pressure. When Shedeur does, it's too cool. Reports claim the vocabulary shifts without the footage changing. None of this is proven fact, but the language is hard to ignore. Common pairings fans say they see: pedigree versus nepotism, leader versus brand builder, patience versus prove it, polish versus flash. Same trait, different label, very different takeaway. Speculation online also suggests tone changes with context. A conservative game plan for Arch becomes coaching protection. Limited reps for Shedeur become coach doesn't trust him. Missed throws are timing for one QB and decision-making for the other. Those are framing choices, not stats. Again, this is observation, not a verdict. But words shape expectation. If audiences hear training wheels, they assume the ceiling is intact. If they hear overhyped, they assume the ceiling is capped. The terms you repeat become the box a player has to climb out of. Some analysts push back, saying it's all standard context. Venue, first start, opponent strength. Fair. But fans reply, context should travel both ways. If we soften one performance with setup and scheme, we can soften the other with protection, rotation, and tiny sample size. Because once language sets the tone, the film gets heard through it. And that's how a routine miss sounds like growth for one player and a smoking gun for another. You don't need a grand conspiracy to see an incentive. Familiar stories feel safer. Unfamiliar ones get stress tested. Once the adjectives started drifting, the internet did what it always does. It pulled receipts, time-stamped clips, side-by-side graphics, quote tweets of the same analysts saying the exact opposite thing a week apart. Fans didn't argue feelings, they posted evidence. Common receipts circulating. Stat cards. Arch's debut, approximately 17 out of 30, around 170 yards, 0 touchdowns, around 58 QBR. Versus commentary calling it training wheels, first start nerves. Preseason snippets. Shedeur's limited pressured reps with no turnovers versus commentary labeling him not ready, 5th round ceiling. Side-by-side quotes. Patience for one QB, let him cook, versus hard ceilings for the other, won't see the field. Beat note threads. Scheme protected versus coach doesn't trust him, depending on the name on the jersey. Language grids, poise pedigree polish, map to one player. Cocky brand flash, map to the other. None of this proves a grand plot, but it shows a repeatable pattern. When the tape underwhelmed for one prospect, coverage slid toward hypotheticals and potential. When the sample was tiny for the other, coverage slid toward verdicts. Fans also started compiling then versus now, reels. Draft season praise for Shedeur, top 5 potential, versus midsummer cooldowns after his draft slot fell. Same player, different frame. The only thing that changed was leverage in the narrative, not the film. That's why this moment feels different. Social platforms turned into instant peer review. Long panels and polished segments don't get the last word anymore. The quote, the clip, the chart lives right under them. If the story swerves, the timeline shows it. And that accountability cuts both ways. If Arch levels up next month, the receipts will reflect that too. If Shedeur gets real reps and settles in, the receipts will show it. The point isn't to freeze players in place, it's to keep the grading scale honest while they grow. Because this is bigger than one Saturday. When stories outrun the stats, recruiting decisions, NIL value, and even depth chart trust get shaped by vibe instead of tape. This isn't just about takes on a Sunday show. It bleeds into who gets recruited, who gets paid, and who gets snaps. When coverage cushions one player and compresses another, it doesn't stop at perception. It shapes markets. NIL departments track mentions, sentiment, and engagement. Brand teams scan highlight packages and language tone. If a debut with rough numbers gets spun as promise, that prospect's valuation holds. If a steady preseason under pressure gets spun as ceiling, that valuation dips, no matter the film. Coaches feel it too. Some observers say depth chart decisions tilt when outside noise threatens the room. Low drama can become a tiebreaker. Protect the brand gets disguised as protect the locker room. That's how a narrative turns into fewer first-team reps and a shorter runway. Ripple effects the receipts crowd keeps pointing out. Recruiting. Buzz helps secure signings. Skeptical framing cools interest from destination programs. NIL. Language frames leverage. Patience preserves it. Overhyped erodes it. Development. Patience buys mistakes. Verdicts cut reps before growth can show up. Draft boards. Scouts watch the same tape, but decision makers are human. Momentum sways tiebreaks. Locker rooms. When one guy struggles get empathy and another's get autopsied, players notice. None of this says a single article decides a career. But momentum compounds. If you're consistently wrapped in upside, brands wait with you. If you're consistently wrapped in prove it, they wait on you. That's why fans care. Because the next portal move, the next NIL deal, the next spring competition can shift on the story around the tape, not just the tape. If the sport is going to claim merit, then the standard has to travel. Same stage, same stakes, same rules. Strip away the hype, the surnames, the highlight edits, and you're left with film. Arch Manning's first start looked like a first start. Uneven, late flashes, room to grow. Shedeur Sanders' early NFL reps looked like what they were. Limited snaps under heat. No giveaways, room to grow. Both realities can live in the same sentence. The issue isn't that one quarterback got grace, it's that the grace didn't travel. When numbers underwhelm for one player, the story drifts to hypotheticals. Training wheels, conservative calls. Just wait. When the sample is tiny for another, the story jumps to verdicts. Limited ceiling, not ready, fifth round fate. That isn't tape study, that's framing. Some fans argue it's legacy comfort, others say it's brand management. Maybe it's both. What's clear is how language tilts the field. Poise versus cocky, pedigree versus nepotism, patience versus prove it. Those labels don't just shape a segment, they shape opportunity. NIL leverage, first-team reps, draft tiebreakers. None of this seals anyone's future. Arch has time to level up. Shedeur has time to settle in. Growth is the point. But if this sport claims merit, the measuring stick can't switch hands mid-drive. Same position, same stakes, same rules. So here's the ask. Judge the film you see, not the story you were sold. If you give patience, give it consistently. If you demand proof, demand it for everyone. What did you see on the tape? Did the reactions match the game or the name? Drop your take below. If you're into honest, fast film first breakdowns, tap subscribe. We'll track week 2 adjustments, protection changes, and whether the language shifts with the tape. Because reputations are built in sentences, careers are built in snaps. And the only fair way to talk about either is simple. One standard, one tape.